mean, for God's sake, even McCarthy said, the union should not be allowed to operate in America. So that's what I got to say about that, guys.
All right, Dave, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I supported issue 2. There would have been the people on that commission would have been chosen by some of them would have been chosen by the legislature. One of the pluses for issue 2 was that you would have other people than Democrats and Republicans on it. But my argument was the best argument for issue 2 is just to show people a map of Ohio and how the congressional districts are drawn, especially 11 in Cleveland and 9, which goes from Cleveland all the way to Toledo. I have a friend who lives in Seven Hills, and he said that the Seven Hills is the handle between the two dumbbells of the district, Cleveland and Akron. So I thought that, yeah. As for giving people the right to do what they want, yes, this is fine, but remember that the majority should not infringe on individual rights, whether local level, state level, or federal level. So
right, because we have a republic and not a democracy.
We're supposed to have a republic, and we used to have one, yes. We should have one again.
That's correct. That's correct, but here's the difference, guys, okay? And, I mean, it's just, my opinion, or everybody's got their opinion. You're right, Dave, on that, except the fact is this, okay? When you have, let's say, a school, okay, majority of parents do not want, let's say my daughter, okay, to be given birth control by the teachers or the nurse there, okay?
Oh, of course not.
Vote, yeah, the parents vote not to allow it. Mm-hmm. But you're right on meaning if the girl's parents decide that she should be on birth control, they still should have the right to go to the doctor and do it as a family.
Yeah, so it should be up to the family, not to the government, not to the and not and then the taxpayer shouldn't pay for it. Yeah.
Right, that's what I meant.
Exactly. And
sure.
Mike, what we're trying to say is, if that's what they want, if that's what the majority wants, then the majority will elect the proper representative to represent them.
Right. The only thing is we gotta educate the majority, Robert. That's the problem.
Yes. Absolutely.
We gotta educate them. That's why these fine guys call your show. That's why I call your show. Hopefully, if even we get one listener new a night on the minimum, okay, and we educate that person, we still score victory, my friend.
That's correct.
So,
I think they learned quite a bit tonight.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Arlie. You wanted to say something?
As a friend of mine told me, we have what he called representative democracy. Yeah. We have democratic undertones, but we have a representative form. The popular vote is a vestige of democracy. But on top of that, we have representatives, the electors, who represent, or supposed to represent the popular vote. We do have some level of majority rule when it comes to things like, congressional elections and senatorial, and that, whoever gets the most votes gets elected senator or congressman. So those things, yes, we have the majority. We do have democracy in that sense. We don't need a democracy, a pure democracy like California, where they allow the people to vote themselves all these programs, but when it comes time for them to vote for the tax increases, they don't, and then the state goes flat broke, trying to finance programs that the people won't pay for. I don't agree. I don't agree. What I mean by we're talking. I know what you're talking about when you talk about direct democracy, where you have these. It's dangerous because you have these. Let me just say this: if this country did everything based on public referendum, from war to diplomacy to who to appoint to everything, can you imagine what we would have? It would be easy for a few people to sway the crowd through fear or emotion to vote a certain way in the referendum. And California has a lot of these referendums, They proposition this, proposition that. And don't get me wrong, some of the things they wanted to do out there would be fine. They wanted to pass, was it Proposition 37? It was against they wanted food companies to label whether there was GMO in the food, so the people know what they're buying. So I don't have a problem with that. That's a state matter. I don't think that should be a federal matter. But it's, I'm all for that. I think it failed though.
It did fail.
Weird, because the people they polled, when they polled the population in California, more than half of them were for it. But it failed. I don't know how that worked. California voted for Proposition 8 to define marriage between a man and a woman, and the court threw the decision out. So, the judiciary is basically legislating from the bench. You have all these activist judges. And then, of course, the other thing I would say is I think it's curious watching a presidential race where when the election comes in, the results are coming in. And even before that, they basically, the Republican and the Democratic Party, particularly our party, the Republican Party, they have decided to write off whole states. They write off a whole segment of the population. They're like, well, California's a stronghold. We'll never win out there. Well, with the right candidate, you might win in California. They don't campaign in California. And by the way, California is the mother lode. It has the most electoral votes of any state. Second only is Texas, who has 34. So, it's curious to watch how the Republican Party does not want to try to, they say I remember this about 4 years ago, they said they were they were going to have a 50-state strategy. A 50-state strategy? If you have a 50-state strategy, then you would have had Romney campaigning in California to win that state's electoral vote. You would be trying to sway what is considered one of the most liberal states. I don't see how Romney...
I'm going to let Todd jump in here because we left Todd out.
No, that's okay. When it comes to this conversation, I think Arlie brings up a really important point. I mean, Reagan won California. Why couldn't Ron Paul win California? Well, because he wasn't running. So,
right. Go ahead, Arlie.
No, I'm not necessarily done yet.
Okay, no problem.
When it came to 37, I'd like Arlie to maybe look a little deeper into the voting process that happens with the electronic voting machines and maybe question the integrity of voting for something that makes so much sense, and then also looking at the amount of propaganda that was thrown down the people's throats. I really don't think that the people didn't want to know what was in their food, at least an educated voter. And honestly, most people that vote, for the most part, they do have somewhat of a brand on their shoulders. Most of them sit at home and don't vote, like myself, even though I consider myself above average. But I think there was a huge ploy that was done on that 37, and I think it's a horrible example of something the states were trying to do that was good, that was overthrown by the corporations and their spending. So I'd hate to use that as an example as the states not doing what they should have.
Okay, go ahead, Arlie.
There are a lot of things that it just don't make any sense. The Republican Party, like I said, writes off the East Coast, they write off the West Coast. They give up on whole segments of states. They don't even want to attempt to win anything. It's like, well, we're comfortable in our little area. If we can pick up Ohio and Florida and Virginia and one of the Carolinas, then we're okay. And to hell with everybody else.
Me and Dave are on the same page where I think, and I believe you're on the same page, Dave, I think Romney threw this race. I mean, there's no other explanation for it.
He didn't necessarily throw it, but he did such a terrible job. First, as I said at the beginning of the show, repelling the Ron Paul voters, creating the appearance of being a fascist by the way he tried to get Gary Johnson off the ballot in half a dozen states. This was abominable. And he
Think about this. think about this. For the 2 years prior to the candidates, the Republicans jumping into the race, for the 2 years at least prior to the Republican primaries, the media had already anointed Romney the likely nominee. Before there was a primary, before anybody had spent any money, before anybody had jumped into the race. And, you know, Romney was Obama's best. Romney was Obama's dream come true for a person to beat. He was perfect. He was like a lamb to the slaughter. This person, Romney, was perfect. He was the worst possible candidate, and I said if he gets nominated, that he will send his party down in flames this November because nobody likes him. He's easy to attack. He has too many skeletons in the closet. He's got all of these weak spots that are easy to tap into. You know, he's stiff looking. He doesn't come off as very folksy or charming with people, and believe me, that does go a long way when it comes to trying to appeal to anybody. He doesn't come off as somebody that looks kind of the person to appeal to the worker, because he never was a worker. You know, if you live in a $12 million mansion and everything was given to you from day one, you're not a worker. There's nothing working class about that man.
Arlene, can I just say one thing? But what politician do you know who has really worked hard? Like, let's say a blue-collar job. Very few of them. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I know that, but I mean, what I mean is, and that's the other point. We need to start putting people in there who have worked, who have actually gotten their hands dirty. The people who are in there, like the Romney character, he's a person that he's a weather vane. He goes where the wind blows for political convenience and expedience. And like I said, he was easy. I don't know if he's through the race. I tend to think he just sucked. That's what I think. I think he lost because he sucked. He was awful.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He was just an awful choice. I mean, and think about it. When you have two choices and you have the real McCoy and then you have the generic knockoff, who do you usually vote for? The real McCoy.
Communist.
They had the real McCoy in the White House, so they didn't want to vote for, Obama light. They voted for the real deal, and I knew they would when it came right down to, because I started seeing articles relating to that were written by Ron Paul people saying, well, if they put Romney on the ticket, Obama will beat him because he's just a cheap version in the brown paper wrapper. He is something that is not. He's a generic of Obama, and the policies are the same. As Judge Napolitano put it, there's not a dime's worth of difference between them on really anything. One likes labor unions and the other one likes corporations, but they both like big government. The two, and it's funny because I was thinking about this. I was talking to a friend of mine a few nights ago, about a week ago. We were talking, and I brought up the 1964 presidential election. There were 3 quote-unquote moderates and 1 conservative. Barry Goldwater was the conservative. Ron Paul kind of is from that line of the Barry Goldwater type. There was Barry Goldwater. There was Nelson Rockefeller. There was a guy named Stanton who was governor of New Jersey. And there was a man by the name of George Romney. George Romney bashed, all 3 of these men bashed Goldwater as dangerous, as too extreme, as not enough to the center, and all of this stuff. And it's funny because George Romney, the governor of Michigan at the time, and I believe he was, and Romney's father, basically, you can kind of see where Romney gets his politics. His politics are almost passed through the bloodstream from his father to him, and they're basically a bunch of, I don't know how to describe them, but I always used to hear these people talk about Rockefeller Republicans.
Or neocon.
Yeah, they're people who basically the Rockefeller Republicans got big notice during the time of Nixon and Ford. That's where they were really in there. They had a lot of influence during Nixon and Ford's administration, and after that well, let's say this is the Rockefeller types were more liberal in that they believed in social policies that a lot of conservatives didn't like. They believed in, they were more open to things like the Equal Rights Amendment, which, shows, why presidents like Nixon and Ford were, supportive of getting the Equal Rights Amendment ratified. And then after Reagan got in there, you never heard any more about it. No Republican since Ford supported the Equal Rights Amendment. And
can you believe this guy's only 24 years old, Dave?
He's very well informed. I'm glad to see that, because some of us are getting more and more mature, and as time goes on, we have less energy.
Yeah,
we need well-informed young people to take over.
Yeah, I'd like for Arlie and Dave to become friends, and Arlie to soak up as much knowledge as he can from Dave if he decides.
Well, he knows a lot. He knows a lot already.
Well, I can always learn more. I admit that I don't know as much as I think I do. Ford, like I said, Ford was the last Republican to support the ERA, and after Reagan, after 1980, you never heard any more about it. It's funny because the Republican Party always lionizes people like Reagan. I was talking to Robert about this the other night on the phone, on a conversation we were having, just the two of us. It's funny, they lionize Ronald Reagan, but when you look at Ronald Reagan's actual record as president, his record, I love his rhetoric. I love Ronald Reagan's rhetoric.
Oh,
but his governing is awful. Mm-hmm. He gave in.
You got it.
He passed. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we had that big boom. Was it 12 million jobs created in the 80s as a result of the Ronald Reagan tax cuts, like 30% across the board.
Yes, but then he went back and raised a lot of them.
Yeah, and then after that, he approved to raise taxes 7 times.
Yes.
And he gave in to Democrats on debt ceiling rate increases, which is basically the tax increases came in there. And, he gave in on amnesty. They've done so much. They've done so much. They pretend to be conservative. And by the way, the neocons, as we refer to them, the neocons, which get their fatherhood from people like Leo Strauss and Irving Kristol. Mm-hmm. These people, they really got started. They really got started under Reagan. That's when they really got rolling, was under Reagan. They were there before, but they really started getting. Reagan was surrounded by nothing but neoconservatives, and then.
Well, hey, Arlie, we got about 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna let Todd go ahead and say something. I know he's been trying to get in there, but I love this. This is great.
I know that talking to Dave for a while, I know that Dave, you actually campaigned for Gary Goldwater, didn't you?
Oh, yes, I did. That was the first time I was old enough to vote for president.
I'd like to hear a little bit about that, because Arlie brought up a couple of names that just make my stomach want to throw up, like Rockefeller and the other guys that were running against him. And I'd like to maybe expel my time and give it to Dave to explain maybe some of the sentiment that was going on at that time with Barry Goldwater and Rockefeller and all the other guys that were running.
Arlie's got it exactly correct. As for Reagan was a great actor. His greatest performances were from January 20th, 1981 to January 20th, 1989. And during this last campaign, some newswoman of questionable intelligence said Romney is popular in Michigan because his father was governor there during the 1960s. And I said at the time that, if people knew what George Romney stood for, that would be an argument against Mitt Romney becoming president.
He was a communist.
Yeah, he was socialist. For Goldwater, he was a truly principled Republican. He believed in less government, lower taxes, less control. They told us back in '64 if we voted for Goldwater, we'd have rioting in the streets and the war in Vietnam, and they were right, but it was Lyndon Johnson who actually did it.
Could I say something real quick about Reagan?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you remember when Reagan was campaigning? He said there's no how in the way he's going to pick George H. Bush for vice presidential nominee.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Right.
Somebody's got, because see, Reagan from, what my father told me, okay, what was actually conservative in the beginning. And what had happened was, maybe my dad had a different opinion, or maybe he didn't know, as much as Reagan as about, you do. But I can tell you what had happened, somebody got to Reagan and told him, you're going to put George H. Bush in, period. No questions or buts about it. So finally, to the surprise of the party, the country, you see him at the RNC, convention, and it's announced the surprise that Bush is going to be the running mate, okay? And then what happened to Reagan when Reagan was doing all these tax cuts and doing, pretty good stuff for the country? Somebody shot. Okay.
But the 22 wasn't meant to kill him.
Well,
on the other hand, there's a book by Kent Steffgen, Steffgen, called "Here's the Rest of Him," which described Reagan's term as governor of California during the 1960s, and he supported higher taxes then, he supported gun control then, a lot of things that he later rhetorically opposed, but as president he did not do that much actually to stop it. You have to, in all of the cases, you have to clearly delineate between what they say and what they actually do.
Yeah.
No matter who.
Go ahead, Mike.
My whole thinking was, what the heck was that about? With the surprise of the vice presidential nominee being George H. Bush, after Reagan hated Bush. Then all of a sudden they whoever it was, they tried to shoot him. I mean, maybe it was just a 22, but then again they said that Kennedy was only shot by one shooter too. Okay, so who really knows what the inner working is? One last thing I'd like to say, and then I'm going to let you guys continue because you got way more information than I do to speak about. If you look at the last probably 5 to 10 presidents, okay, who have they represented? Not the middle class, not the hardworking people, okay? They've either represented the people who don't want to work and want the social programs, and the people who are ultra rich. That's your Obama, okay? It's for the poor, and your Romney is for the ultra rich. The guys like us, the middle class who work and are educated, nobody's there for us. And I think, unfortunately, we have to educate people, to get somebody that's common ground, for everybody. So that's my 2 cents into it.
3 points I wanted to bring up at the last. You're talking about Bush. Yeah, they decided that he would be the nominee at the convention. And then Reagan was shot in 1981. March of 1981, I think it was.
Yes.
And
it was.
Interestingly enough, Hinckley, the man who shot him, was related to the Bush family.
They were close friends.
What a small world.
Yes.
2 other things. It was funny because you were talking about Bush and Reagan basically said, Bush basically called Reagan's economic policies voodoo economics, said they were too radical and whatever. There's a book. I don't know how much to really believe her, but there's a woman by the name of Kitty Kelly. She wrote a book about the unauthorized Nancy Reagan, the biography. Then she had another called The Family, and it was about the Bushes and the Reagans. And the way it looked like is that there was no love lost between, for instance, Barbara Bush and Nancy Reagan. There was no love lost. And to actually have anything to do with each other, meet with each other or have coffee with one another or anything on the residence was like pulling teeth. They didn't like each other. They didn't, and they resented each other. And particularly, Nancy Reagan resented Barbara, for her husband, criticizing her husband in the race. It's personal, and not only that, but
Arlie, we only have about 3 minutes, so
I
want to ask.
Point out something.
Oh, yeah, I'll let you make your point. But I want to ask all of you: are you available tomorrow evening at 8:00?
Yes.
I am.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I won't be available. I have a social function with a friend of the family for Thanksgiving.
Okay, and we're not going to be here Thursday, so we'll reconvene on Sunday after tomorrow. But go ahead, Arlene, make your point, and we'll continue this conversation tomorrow.
The true irony of it was I was watching the Democratic convention this summer, and the Arizona delegation for Obama, the Democratic Arizona delegation, pledged their votes. Guess who they had speaking as the chair of their delegation for Arizona? They had the granddaughter of Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater's granddaughter came to pledge for the Arizona delegation to the Democratic National Convention. I'm thinking to myself, wow, how did she become a Democrat? She basically said that she said to everybody, my grandfather was Barry Goldwater, and she basically said that the Republican Party had gone downhill and that the party that exists now is not a party that her grandfather would know.
All right, we got about a minute, so I'm going to turn this over to Dave.
Well, every family has a black sheep. Every family has a black sheep. I suppose she's the Goldwater family black sheep. Barry Goldwater Jr. supported Ron Paul in 2008 in
yeah.
Year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Todd.
I just wanted to say, I'm not sure if any of you are aware of who Bob Chapman is, but in his last interview...
The late, great Bob Chapman.
Yes. The late, great... He died of pancreatic cancer very painfully and still did interviews on radio. He said that if you listened to any of Reagan's early speeches, you would think you were at a Communist Party meeting. So Ronald Reagan was no friend of conservatism unless it got him into office.
All right, gentlemen, we're out of here. I thank you for being on, and we'll see you tomorrow night at 8:00.
8:00 it is.